I'll probably do the agribusiness finance, so I don't have to do the foundations of finance.
They just kind of like float up and down, and you're looking for something wrong.
This one?
And so, like, some people are taking pictures. It's like this data is table, this data is the table. To get this one from the other, that's what it needs.
What elective are you doing? Oh, that's nice. Yeah, he's good. I'm doing the environmental impact assessment one online right now. Yeah. We're doing really down, honestly. I picked up a real estate matter, which I'm probably gonna regret. I want to do this guy that
All right, well, this is the perfect day. You guys know what this is the perfect day for? So you want to guess what this is the perfect day for something? Win? Oh, bonus points for attendance? Yeah, that's a good day. That's a good day for sure. Yeah. Maybe we'll do that. Bonus points for attendance. Anyone got a piece of paper?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I do.
Anyone got a piece of paper?
Yeah, totally.
Send it around. Everybody write their name and sign it. Bonus points for attendance. I like it.
You knew it. And your bonus. The people on Zoom, they should get points too, right?
No.
No? What if they're like, it's budget
Zoom.
reason?
Like, if you can prove you're sick, then I'll give you points. Zoom.
Turn on your mic and start coughing.
Yeah, turn on your mic and start throwing up. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I don't want that. I don't want that. Yeah, so good day for that. Good day for a little extra credit. Maybe there will be a little exam question that you'll know the answer to on by the end of the class too. And only you will know the answer to it. How's that? Unless any of you tell some of your compatriots who aren't here, and I wouldn't advise it. You know how that works, right? If you tell those other people, then it eliminates the value of that for you, right? So, but you can. I'm not going to stop you from it. Just make sure to sign the piece of paper. Don't ask what it's about, just sign it. It's like signing your life away.
Bonus points for coming to class. Actually good, thank you.
Okay, so yeah, and you know, there's another reason why everyone should get extra credit who's actually here. You know why? If you had to guess at that, why would that be? Well, because it's going to be the boringest class. If you thought any other classes were bad, this one's worse, all right? So I can't help it. I'm sorry, this one's worse. So you guys deserve extra credit for attending today. This is awesome. All right. Okay, so we're talking about these non-renewable resources, but there's some useful information here. So you know what this stuff is? Who's that?
Clover?
I can hear.
Clover?
Clover, no. No. Starts with a C though. Canola, anyone ever heard of canola? Yeah, canola. They grow a lot of it up in Canada, so it's canola. It's great stuff, huh? Right out there with the natural gas mine out in the middle of the canola field. Canola is interesting because you can use it for what these days? Canola oil, right? Anyone ever use canola oil for cooking, I guess, right? But what else do we use it for? Renewable what? Renewable biodiesel. Renewable diesel, right? Actually, canola and soybean can be used for renewable diesel, and yeah, it's pretty phenomenal stuff that way. Right? And how do the Europeans use it? Well, something similar to, they mostly use flax, but they run boilers, so they actually produce electricity with it sometimes. They got in a little bit of trouble because, you know, a lot of boilers in Northern Europe used oils, you know, flaxseed, canola oil, whatever, for basically producing electricity and heat. So they have cogeneration facilities where they produce electricity and hot water at the same time, kind of like this power plant that's taken like forever on the other side of campus to be produced. Anyone seen that power plant? Yeah. Is that the ugliest thing ever? Yeah. I mean, there's something redeeming about this McCracken thing with these like, its stacks are actually kind of nice looking, right? They're brick. Those things are like metal stacks up there in the middle of nowhere. Kind of crazy. Okay, but anyways, they're the Northern Europeans have the same concept of cogeneration where you produce electricity and hot water at the same time. In fact, many cities, so all of you, I mean, I assume you guys take showers once in a while. Where does your hot water come from? A hot water heater, right? Where's the hot water heater located? Yeah, in your apartment or house or somewhere close by, right? So in lots of Northern European cities in particular, and throughout Russia, a lot of systems are centralized, they get hot water, and so there's two sets of water pipes that come to every house, a hot water pipe and a cold water pipe. And so the hot water is generated at one of these cogeneration plants. So there's some substantial efficiencies gained by this cogeneration. That's why the university wanted to build that plant, right? It's because they need hot water for heating and also for some cooling uses on campus. And it's expensive to heat water with electricity, so they figure why not generate the electricity, and the extra heat produced by the electricity production process will heat some of our water at the same time, right? So it makes a really efficient heating system for hot water. So yeah, so a lot of European cities, and especially in the north, use that system, that type of system to pump hot water out from a central place, and so they produce both heat and hot water and electricity at the same time. So it's kind of interesting, and they use oil for it. So how did the Europeans get in trouble for that? Like about 15 years ago, 15 years ago. Last time oil prices got really high, what happened? Oil prices got high. They were running into trouble finding oil for use in some of their cogeneration plants. So what did they do? They had trouble finding some of this stuff. So where did they go to get oil? Where would you go to get oil if you had to get some kind of oil? Yeah.
The ocean.
No.
Foreign markets.
They did go to foreign markets, but not the ocean. What's the opposite of the ocean? The land. What kind of land is the most opposite of the ocean? The rainforest land. So with the rainforest, how'd they get it from the rainforest? Anyone ever heard of palm oil, right? So it's a big issue in Southeast Asia, right? There's a ton of palm oil production in Southeast Asia. And a lot of times, for a long time, and still today, places like Indonesia, Malaysia, et cetera, not so much Malaysia actually, but Indonesia, Cambodia, yeah, mainly Indonesia, they actually take land out of rainforests and convert it to palm oil production, right? So the Europeans were buying palm oil and using it for heating in Northern Europe. Oil prices spiked the last time, this is about 15 years ago, something like that. It's kind of a big issue, right? Because they got in a lot of trouble for that, because people don't like that, right? They don't like the idea that they may be destroying the rainforest at the same time that they're getting nice heating, okay? Anyway, so that's canola, used for renewable energy in many cases, especially by the Canadians, whatever. We're talking about non-renewable resources today, just for the last time. I think this might be the last time. So the great thing about today is it might be the last time we talk about non-renewable stuff, right? So we're moving to mostly renewable stuff later on as we move forward. So this is slowly to regenerate, if they regenerate at all. Everyone knows that about coal, natural gas, and oil, right? It takes a long time to regenerate that stuff. Maybe difficult to extract, marked by significant technological change in extraction and use. And that's just, where is that? You know where that is? What a beautiful picture. Would you guys love to live there? Anyone want to live there? Who lives there now?
That was Troy.
What was that?
Like Michigan. Michigan looks kind of like that, kind of gross.
Disaster zone up there, Michigan, yeah. No, it's not Michigan.
Texas.
California, it's LA, it's Hollywood. Holy shit, really? Yeah, man, it was like the center of the oil universe maybe 100 years ago. Pretty crazy, huh? Yeah, actually, if you go out to California these days, you can still see oil derricks all through Southern California. It's kind of wild, right? In fact, they just had a huge oil spill in the Monterey Bay. What was it, about 2 years ago? Remember hearing about that? So, I should put it on Google Maps. You can look at it. So there's that island out there in the middle of Monterey Bay, and they've got a couple oil derricks out there. There's some oil wells working and pumping If you've anyone ever flown into LA airport, the airport there? You go south on 405, what's like the first thing you see? It's a huge refinery, right? It's a massive refinery. It's basically in Santa Barbara, right, which is a really rich place. So that refinery, gets oil from all over Southern California, refines it, also gets oil from Alaska. So yeah, it's like one of the biggest oil refineries. But anyways, this pipe that was bringing in oil from, I forget what the island is out in Monterey Bay, but it was bringing the oil in from that to the refinery there. It, I don't know, opened up somehow. Sprung a leak, caused a problem. Oops. Yay, whatever, okay. Non-renewable resources. Prices reflect scarcity, surprisingly, right? Including information about how much may be left for the future. So there's a lot of information in prices. Prices are going down like they were for most of the last century with respect to oil, at least until the 1970s. Lower prices reflected what? There was a lot of demand, growing demand for use of oil, but also a massive increase in supply. So there was not a lot of scarcity. Scarcity kind of came about here. And as we talked a bit about in class, that scarcity was driven by what? It was driven by OPEC, right? A monopoly of some sense, a cartel that sort of decided to exert some power on prices, and they tried to exclude the US from consuming their stuff, and that really drove prices up. So that created a bit of a problem. So yeah, there was a little bit of, well, maybe a lot of scarcity at the time. Then that scarcity kind of disappeared for a period, right? And that cartel kind of broke apart, as cartels often want to do. They can't always exert the same amount of power, especially when you got a lot of countries like those. Many of the countries in the Middle East don't always get along well with each other, right? So they sometimes, if one country wants to get back at another country and they're both supposed to restrict their production of oil, if Saudi Arabia doesn't like Iran, which we know they don't, they may decide to just pump a lot of oil, right? And lower prices, because that's going to make a problem for Iran, right? It's going to create problems for Iran because most of Iran's income is going to be based on how much oil they're actually able to produce, right? Lower prices mean they're going to have less income. So if you're late, make sure to sign your name in, all right? And make sure to write that you were late on there so I can deduct a little bit from the benefit that you get. Just kidding. Okay. Prices reflect scarcity. Is oil scarce right now? What's going on in the oil markets right now?
Yeah, OPEC like limiting their supply of oil.
Yeah, so Saudi Arabia has maintained production cuts that they've had in place since the pandemic, right? So they had some production cuts in the pandemic, and then as things went back to more normal, whatever that is, after the pandemic, they never actually expanded production again and just decided to maintain those production cuts for additional time. And so that's created some scarcity in the market. We have this Russia thing, right? And all the evidence is Russia kept their production at about the same level. But the problem is they kept it at about the same level, right? At the same time that demand has expanded a little more, right? So we've got sort of the same situation as maybe not quite as bad as it was right here, but prices, or even as bad as it was in the earlier in the 2000s, but we do have higher prices today because maybe of some policy-induced scarcity, right? Oil inherently isn't all that scarce. There's plenty of it out there, but because a couple countries do have control over a significant portion of it, and other countries aren't able to expand supply quickly enough when they sort of restrict their production, then prices kind of go up, right? Remember, this is a really inelastic market, inelastic demand, so that means prices are gonna really spike up, right? There's a restriction in supply. Where's the sheet of paper? Did you guys all get it over there? Okay, we'll send it back over there. Thank you. Just make sure that gets to me at the end. Whoever has that at the end, if you don't get it to me at the end, then you're fired, all right? Okay. Okay, so an important concept, real versus nominal. I know some of you probably had this before. Some people haven't. Okay, so the difference between real and nominal is nominal prices are unadjusted for inflation. Real prices are adjusted for inflation. So I plotted out here two sets of prices, oil prices. say nominal prices are sort of considered money of the day. Real prices are adjusted for inflation. And they're always put into terms of like a specific year. All right, so in this case, I adjusted oil prices to the 2021 price. So the very last year, this graph only went to 2021. So the real and nominal price in 2021 are exactly the same. And all the historical prices are adjusted in real terms into 2021 dollars, right? So this means, when you look at this, that back in 1860, I don't know, maybe 65 or something like that, right? Oil prices were like 100, we're at their all-time maximum in real terms, right? So what's this real, what's that mean? What's that mean? So it's adjusted for inflation. Yeah.
It just means that it's like, its value is reflected of the value that society had on it in relation to the value that it had on other things as well.
Yeah, that's a pretty good description of it. So it's kind of, its values expressed in terms of the value of that relative to other things in the economy, right? That could have been purchased.
And it's converted into a number that we can understand based off the value that we currently have off of money.
Right, so I put it in
like-
2021, so it's kind of current with us, right?
Yeah, if you were like, oh, it's 3 cents a gallon or whatever, it'd be hard for us to look at a chart and really understand what that meant back then.
Yeah, so the nominal price for oil was really low, but the real price was really high. Meaning that, yeah, actually at that time, there was a huge amount of demand. So oil was really relatively scarce, right, at that time. And relative to other things that we could be buying in the economy, it was actually really expensive. Make sense? So that's just terminology that we use all the time. I probably should have defined it earlier, but I decided to define it now. How's that? Yay. Okay, nominal, real. Great. Mostly we focus on real dollars when we talk about energy prices, especially over time. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to talk about with these non-renewable resources, how we allocate them over time. A little bit about technology. We're going to come back to backstops and talk about this concept of dynamic efficiency, which you guys are all going to love. And a little bit of net present value. Okay, you guys like net present value? And that's when the people on the screen will start to throw up. So we do net present value stuff, okay? But we'll make it really easy in here. We won't actually do too much with it. So discounting is important. So you guys all know about time value money? Some definition stuff. So this is definition. Actually, I will say, this is a little boring, I agree. But everything you need to know about climate change is in this lecture, all right? Especially the economics of climate change, all right? And we won't talk about that for another few weeks, but you'll see it all again, right? Which is interesting. So time value money, you and I prefer to have money today rather than money tomorrow, right? We sort of express that by taking out loans, right? We want to go to college today rather than go to college in a decade from now once we've earned a lot of money, so we borrow the money from somebody else so that we can pay off the university to go to college today, right? So we use a loan, do the same thing with a car oftentimes, do the same thing with our house or whatever, right? And sometimes we might have extra money in our hands and we might loan it to somebody else. Anyone ever done that? Made a loan to their brother, sister, whoever, right? I loan stuff to my kids all the time. Never get it back, never get any interest payments on it, but I loan it to them, all right? Okay, so loans that's just kind of a evidence of the fact that we have some preferences of some time value of money, right? Savings is a similar thing that illustrates the way in which we have these time preferences for money. Interest rates, right? Interest rates reflect our time value of money. So a higher interest rate reflects what? Stronger preference for money today versus money in the future. So if we have a higher interest rate, it means that we really want the cash today. How do we see that? So if you have credit cards and you're paying credit card and you actually don't pay off the credit card and you have to pay it off over time, right? So you're So you're doing what? You're saying you need the money today. You're saying you really need the money today, right? Because you're using the credit card, which is a pretty high interest rate instrument, right? It's a pretty high interest rate way to borrow money from someone else. Why is a credit card such a high interest? Why is there such high interest rates on credit cards? Yeah.
It's unsecured.
Yeah, unsecured. What does that mean?
That means there's no assets backing it.
There's no assets backing it. And so it means you then put your car down as an asset to back the loan or something like that, right? So if you have a car loan, right, what can happen if you don't pay back the loan? They can come repossess your car, right? So your car is backing the loan. Same thing with your house, right? If you don't pay your house loan, then the mortgage company can come and kick you out of the house and take your house, essentially, right? Yeah, so that's asset-backed loan, and you're gonna have a lower interest rate on that because you're willing to put an asset up to sort of back that. But yet with a credit card, you know, if you have a credit card, you just, you know, sign a piece of paper and said you're quite happy to take the credit, and you're happy to sort of take the loan from them, and you're not gonna put anything up, so if you don't pay it back, too bad for the credit card company. They don't have any way to actually get it out, other than they can sort of give you a bad credit rating, I guess, right? It's like their only recourse, but they can't actually come and physically take an asset from you, right? So it's not backed by anything, no collateral. All right, good. So, you know, high interest rates on those things just reflects the fact that we want money today. So if you're willing to sort of use a credit card and use the credit on the credit card, that is not pay it back right away, that's just reflecting you needing to have money right now, right? So having high demand for cash today. And doing it that way, getting your cash today through a credit card rather than going out and getting some kind of a secured loan that would have an asset that backs it. Make sense? Somewhat, right? Okay, now this concept of a discount rate, and we've used that a little bit when we talked about the levelized cost of electricity, right? These discount rates are what? Basically synonymous with an interest rate. Right? So for this class, we're essentially going to consider it to be synonymous, right? So we'll use the term discount rate or interest rate essentially interchangeably in here, okay? You know, if you take a finance class, there's going to be some different things that go into a discount rate that you would use for a financial problem than maybe an interest rate, actually. An interest rate would be something you get on the market. A discount rate would be something that you might use internally within your firm. So if you take a finance class, you might sort of understand these as slightly different things, interest rates and discount rates, but for this class, at least we're gonna just treat them as exactly the same, okay? Yay. Got that definitional? Now we get the present value. So I'm gonna come back to the slide in just a second. We'll go to the next slide first. Let's just put the formula up there. Okay, so we gotta sort of know how to do this, all right? So we gotta sort of, we're gonna do the most simplest possible sort of discounting and present value stuff. So, couple definitions. Future value is what? Future value is the compounded value in N years of money that you save today. Ouch. Compounded value in N years of money that you save today. So the compounding, right? You guys had some of you have finance? How many of you have seen this before, done this before? So most everybody? That's good. Oh, great. All right. So you get this is all sort of familiar to you. So the future value, so you get the present values of money you might put in the bank today, right? You got an interest rate on that present value, and you're gonna put it in the bank at that interest rate, 1%, 2%, 8%, whatever, right? For N years, and you're gonna end up with a future value, right? That's the money you get out at the end of this compounding period, okay? So a simple formula, that's as complicated as we're gonna get in this class, but we do need to sort of understand that, right? The fact that there's a relationship between money in the future and present money. So present value is the one-time net benefit received in N years of something received in N years from now, right? So present value, you can just take this formula and reconstruct it, take whatever that future value is, and then determine the present value based on the interest rate. All right, so now we go back and look at this thing, right? And say, okay, suppose your grandparents promise to give you $5,000 if you graduate from college in 2 years. Anyone ever had the grandparent do this? So maybe you should go back and tell your grandparents they should do this. $5,000 graduate from college in 2 years, right? What's what's this amount currently worth to you, assuming your interest rate or discount rate is 7%? Well, if you use that formula, it's pretty easy to figure out, right? You figure out that the present value is $4,367, right? So if your interest rate is 7%, you're gonna use that formula. You're gonna stick to 5,000, which is the future value, right? 5,000 is 2 years from now. You put that up in the numerator, and in the denominator, you're gonna put 1 plus the interest rate, 1 plus 0.07, so 1.07. And then n is 2 years, so it's to the second power squared. So 5,000 divided by 1.07 squared is equal to 5,000 times 1.07 to the negative 2, or 4367, right? So what this formula is just saying is you're indifferent. At 7% interest rate, you're indifferent between 4367 today and 5,000 in 2 years, right? Okay, good enough? Okay, that's all we're trying to do with this stuff. This like just the most important thing when it comes to climate change. You'll be surprised, because it is climate change right there. Do this with a whole bunch of different things. Value $100 in 10 years at 3% interest. In this case, the future value is unknown, the present value is 100. You're gonna be saving it at 3%, so 1.03 to the 10th power, it's $234, right? Okay, you can look over these slides. If you can't do this, then come see me and we'll help you out with this, all right? You can see how compounding works, right? Just sort of wrote it out there. At the end of the first year, you had $103. At the end of the second year, you had 103 to the 1.03, or multiplied by 1.03, that's 106.09. You get another 3% the next year, 109.27, blah, 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 to 134, okay? Who's got that? Yay. The effective interest rate is really important, right? So at a lower interest rate or discount rate, the future value of $100 is smaller. At a higher discount rate or interest rate, the future value of $100 is bigger, right? A larger interest rate or discount rate puts a bigger discount on the future. Oh shit, what's that mean? Okay, so this is the hardest part about this, all right? So it's like the terminology and how we're trying to keep track of all this stuff. So at a bigger discount rate, we're taking 259 for the future and sort of discounting it back to a small number today, right? At a 1% interest rate, we're taking a small number and discounting it back to the same $100, all right? Okay, so does 1% or 10% value the future more? Right? Which one of those values the future more? 1% values the future more? Why?
Because if you have like 10% interest rate on $100, then you value the present more because you're willing to like, I don't know, make like larger payments for your interest. And if it's only 1%, you believe that your money will be only, you think your money will be just as valuable or in the future than it is today, or you don't need it that bad today.
It's hard to think through, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The lower discount rate or interest rate values the future more, for sure, right? So it's the hardest, to me, it's the hardest thing in economics to sort of think through, especially when you think about the climate problem and how to sort of describe it and discuss it. So yeah, so a higher discount rate values the future less. But it's a bigger number, right? Weird. It's taken a bigger number and made it a small number today, right? How's that working? One way to think about it, so if we were gonna, let's put this into climate change impacts, right? Let's say that these are all the dollar value of climate change impacts in the future, all right? So let's say that in case A, the impact of, your ton of carbon dioxide emissions today is $110 on someone 10 years from now, right? In case C, your impact of 1 ton emitted today is $259. It's a bigger impact, right? Your 1 ton had more of an impact. All right, so, but if the present value of that, of each of those is 100, we're gonna say that the higher discount rate valued the future less, right? So how is that and why is that? So what was happening? So this high discount rate is saying that this $259 of impact you have on somebody in the future, right, is worth only $100 today at 10%. Whereas at 1%, 110 is equal to 100 today. So the lower discount rate valued the future more. That's what I mean by that. Just don't confuse myself. Yeah.
I think in a way it's kind of like similar to inflation, like say the 10% interest rate, in 10 years, you can buy the same amount of things for $259 than you would with $100 this year. So I think like that's kind of a way to think of it.
Okay, so you're saying you can buy as much in the future as you can today at the 10%? Can you explain that again?
So, like say something is $100 right now and you want to buy it. In 10 years, if there's 10% interest rate in 10 years, the same item is going to be $259 instead.
Okay.
So it's like the same product, but it's like an increase in value.
Yeah, so it's the exact same product, all right, it's the exact same product, but at 10%, it was more costly than it would have been a 1% increase, right? So, so inflation is an interesting thing. When we think about it in the same terms as inflation, you have to think about that for a second. Yeah, let me come back to that one. Okay? Because inflation it's a slightly different concept, an issue. Let me come back to these climate damages, all right? Your 1 ton of climate impacts causes, say, $259 worth of damages in the future, right? Let's just say that's true. Let's just say that's true. Say your 1 ton of damages today causes $259 of damages in the future, all right? So if your discount rate is 1%, would you spend $100 to fix it or solve it? Would it be worth spending $100 to solve it? Or, yeah. Would it? Why?
Because if you use $100 to fix it, it would be worth it because the cost of damage is $110. Does that make any sense? But if it was like any higher, or like, it wouldn't be worth it. Like if it was $259, it wouldn't be worth it. So, I don't know if that made any sense, but in my head it made sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So if the impact is $259, right? The impact of climate change is $259. How much would you spend today to avoid that damage, right? And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that's inherently, it's tied to the interest rate that you have as an individual, all right? If your discount rate is 10%, then you would spend exactly $100 to avoid it, right? Yeah. Sorry.
So, is it kind of like seeing it like in today's, or like if it costs today $100 to like a bit the effects of like 1 ton of CO2 in 10 years at 10% would cost like 259.
It's not about the cost of actually doing it, of abating it.
Or is that the like idea, like it costs more in the future to do the same thing as it does today, or is that not the right idea? I think that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to get you to think of the value of avoiding the ton. The benefits to you, right? The avoided damages actually, which is different, right? The cost is how much do I have to spend to actually avoid the damage, right? So how much is the solar panel gonna cost me, right? It's gonna cost me $50, $500, or $10,000, right? So that's kind of the cost side. The benefits is I don't have forest fires, right? I'm spending less on air conditioning in 10 years because I put the solar panel in today, right? Okay, so the cost side is the money you spend to avoid the damage, right? And the damage is just the damage you experience because the climate's warmer in 10 years, right? But you want to balance those two things out, right? And so if your discount rate is 10%, this formula is saying, oh, I would balance out if the damage is going to be $259 in the future, and my discount rate is 10%, I would spend $100 today, right? On the other hand, if the discount rate is 1%, I would only spend $100 if the future damage is 110. So the lower discount rate, right? My $100 is spent to avoid damages of 110 in the future, right? So to your point, this actually is valuing the future more, the lower discount rate, right? Why is that valuing the future more? Yeah.
So essentially, like, you would spend the same amount of money to pay for less damages.
That's right. That's exactly right. So you'd spend $100 today at a 1% discount rate to avoid 110, right? But if your discount rate is 10%, you'd only spend $100 to avoid $259, right? So it'd take more damages in the future to get you to spend that $100 today, right? So the lower discount rate is valuing the future far more, right? It's saying I care a lot about getting rid of future climate change, so I'll spend $100 today just to avoid 110 in the future. Yeah.
You could also think of it as like a loan type of deal, like if you're build a new building, if it has a high interest rate, and then you're gonna wanna spend or get rid of most of that loan right away in order to not have to spend so much money in the future.
It does work a lot in the same way with respect to loans, right? In the same exact way, that if you prefer money today rather than in the future, right, you'll be willing to take a higher discount rate, right? Because you're worrying less about the future. You're worrying a lot less about the future. So you want the money today, right? You really care less about the future, frankly, right? You just need the cash now, right? Does that make some sense? It's really important for climate change, actually. So why is it important for climate change? So this is the entire climate change debate. So the entire reason why we have a climate change debate is all about the interest rate that we use to decide climate policy, actually, right? So if we use a high discount rate, we do practically no climate policy, right? We're gonna spend $100 only to avoid this really big damage in the future, right? Whereas if we use a low discount rate, we'll spend $100 to avoid a relatively modest damage in the future. If it doesn't make perfect sense right now, it will by the end of the term, because we're gonna come back to it a dozen times. This literally is the entire climate debate boiled into one little number, the discount rate. That's why anybody in climate change argues with each other, because they have different discount rates. So if you're the Biden administration and you're choosing climate policy, are you going to choose a 10% discount rate or 1% discount rate? Just to put it in the political terms for a second, yeah.
the left is normally more climate conscious, and I bet they would choose the 1% rate over the 10% rate.
Yeah, so they're using basically 1.5% to 1.7%, something like that, to choose what's called the social cost of carbon, which is the federal rate for all policy, for deciding all policies and how much to spend on climate change, right? So if you're the Trump administration, what's the rate you would use? 1% or 10%? So they chose 7.5%, right? So they chose a higher rate, right? So it makes sense, right? Given the politics of the two different sort of Republicans or Democrats, what they would choose. Now, what I can say is there's no actual right rate. As an economist, economists will argue about the rate themselves, right? So you'll have plenty of economists who can argue persuasively that we should use a low rate for discounting climate change problems, and plenty of economists, including the Nobel Prize winner who won it for climate change, who argue that we should use a higher rate, right? So no real answer to that question, actually. That is a matter of subjectivity and left to politicians. Yay. All right, so now you know the effective interest rate's really big. There are lots of interest rates. You have a personal rate. All of us have a personal rate, right? We all get interest rates charged to us for different things that we buy. That's really based on us and ourselves. There's a market return rate, which is the rate that companies basically get. It's basically the rate of return in the stock market, essentially, right? So these two are basically market rates, essentially. And then there's the public rate. That's the one we were just talking about, that whoever gets elected as president, their party gets to decide what the rate we use for any kind of government expenditure, all right? So they actually choose that rate, right? They choose any number of rates, and there's arguments on both sides for what those rates should be, right? So that's more of a political rate, right? There's no real right answer to what that rate should be. There is a right answer to what these two rates should be, but it's not the same rate as the public rate. Yeah.
It says like NASA, and like the way you described it was in like preventing damages, but for like NASA, who isn't really preventing damages, they're going out and like discovering
Causing
things.
damages by shooting all those rockets up into the air, right?
Yeah. Like how would they look at the time value of money for NASA? Like, oh, this discovery of this planet with water and possible life is worth like, how does like the time aspect work for an investment into something like that?
Well, they're going to have lots of ways to evaluate the payoff to government expenditures, right? So in NASA, they're likely just going to be comparing the money that's spent on all the programs they have versus the returns that those programs are going to get in terms of new inventions, new innovations. There are ways to value space flight, right? The value of space flight for individuals, as well as the value of space flight for creating satellites and stuff like that, right? So a lot of the benefits of NASA, maybe not so much, the basic research that's, you see so much about, right? Like the Webb telescope that went out and, now is taking satellite pictures of really distant stuff that happened trillions of years ago, right? I mean, that's harder to value, but a lot of the stuff they do can be valued, right? I mean, putting satellites up in the sky, people will pay for that. So, they can't value it perfectly, but they can value the benefits of some of it, right? And then they can compare, the costs and the benefits using the discount rate. The government mostly uses, so what does the government use in terms of discount rate? So our government does have a rate that's set by the market, right? That they can use if they wanted to, right? What's that rate? That's the rate on like the 10-year treasury, right? So that's the rate at which our government, almost a risk-free loan, right? Because people who pay for that or will invest in U.S. treasuries, view the U.S. Treasury sort of bond as almost a risk-free thing, right? Because we've never defaulted on that, right? So that's one way to evaluate, and it's one rate that can be used. And that's usually, right now it's like 5%, but normally it's been around 2.5%. It's more on that rate, right? So it is a market rate because it's set by the market, and the government could use that rate. And sometimes they do for different things like NASA, farm subsidies, et cetera, right? Okay, so individual's interest rate, just quickly, it's the rate we pay for loans, kind of a function of our time preference, risk premium, inflation. Market rates, kind of the rate of return on the stock market. It's kind of surprising, kind of risen 6% per year is the value of the stocks, but if you add in dividends, almost 12% per year, pretty significant growth in that stuff since the 1920s. market rates, whatever. This actually isn't recent, these have gone way back up to like 5.5%, so but they went down a lot. How do we use these things? We use them to evaluate investment options. We already talked about the levelized costs of electricity, so it's used there. Businesses obviously use it, government policy uses it, et cetera, yay, right? Okay, so the only way we're really gonna use it in this class is when we talk about climate change, honestly. Well, before we talk about that, we're gonna talk about resource extraction, because it turns out that the economics of climate change is exactly the inverse of taking shit out of the ground and using it, all right? So we're gonna talk first about taking stuff out of the ground and using it, and then we're gonna talk about climate change later, so. That's the best picture I can come up with, right? That we're taking stuff out of the ground. So how quickly do you extract this stuff, right? Right, and it's an interest rate problem, how quickly you extract it, all right? So you got a fixed asset in the ground, and the question is, how quickly do I extract it? This is what a well owner would actually be wanting to know, right? How quickly should I sort of take this stuff out of the ground? If you have a really high interest rate, do you think you would extract it more rapidly or less rapidly? What do you think?
More rapidly.
Why? So
More rapidly, because if you have less value for the future, then you're like, I need all of it right now. So you can take more of it right now. But if you have a high value for the future, you're like, let me save it for later.
that's mostly right. Yeah, you want to get it out of there. Why also, what might be another reason you want to get it out of the ground pretty rapidly? The high interest rate. Yeah.
Well, to pay back your loan.
Okay. Because you might have some loans for putting that capital in place to get it out of the ground. And your loans are probably pretty high interest rate things, so you want to get it out pretty quickly in order to pay those back, yeah?
If it's a high interest rate, then the economy wants money put into it and not loans taken out. So it would be higher value if there's a high interest rate, or is it the opposite?
Is an asset in the ground, does a high interest rate increase or lower the value of an asset, right? This is an asset, right, the thing in the ground? That's a good question. Does a high interest rate increase or lower the value of an asset? What's it do to the value of an asset? You finance people should know this one. Just roll off your tongue. What happens? Higher interest rates do what to the value of an asset? No, they lower it. They reduce the value of an asset, yeah. Sorry, that's what they do. Reduce the value of an asset. So high interest rate reduces the value of an asset, interesting. Lower interest rates do what? Raise the value of an asset. Kind of one of the things that happened when the Federal Reserve started to raise interest rates about a year and a half ago, what happened? House values kind of slowed down for a while, right? That's kind of maybe an example. They kept going up, but they weren't going up as rapidly as they had in the past, and that was because of higher interest rates. So. Okay, so if we extract more quickly with a higher interest rate. Some of you are arguing that we do, right? They probably agree with that. What's the real reason you extract more quickly with a higher interest rate? You know?
Make more money.
Make more money and do what with it?
You could potentially make more money in the future.
Yeah, because what are you gonna do? You're gonna take this money out. What are you gonna do with the money you take out?
Buy another well.
Yeah, you're gonna consume a little bit of the money and you're gonna buy another well or invest that in some other asset, right? So if the interest rate is higher in the market, right, those other assets are actually have a higher return. And they're cheaper because their asset value has gone down a little bit, right? So yeah, if you're lucky enough to be a well owner, right, and you've got this oil down in the ground, you get a higher interest rate, you're probably gonna extract it a bit faster because you can take the money, invest it in something else, and that something else might be an asset too, and it might have a little lower value now because you got higher interest rates, right? So interest rates could have a huge effect on how quickly we sort of extract stuff from the ground, that's for sure. Right, but the other thing they do is removing oil leaves the future with less oil to use. This is kind of a crazy thing. We have this obscene concept called a marginal user cost, right? So a marginal user cost, which you may have heard about, probably environmental economics or something like that, is what? It's the fact that by taking oil out of the well, what have you done? What have you done?
Scarcity.
What was that?
Scarcity, you increase scarcity.
Created more scarcity? Who have we impoverished? We've impoverished the future, right? We've left the future with less oil, right? So, back when I was growing up, oil was a great thing. We didn't worry about climate change. No one cared about climate change. It wasn't even thought about or talked about or discussed ever, right? And we just thought about taking oil out of the ground because what we could do, we could drive around, we could do all kinds of great stuff with oil, right? We could transport goods and services across the country without worrying about it. No one ever gave any concern about climate change, and all this oil taken out of the ground was just a good thing. But the problem with it was it left the future with less oil, right? So somebody in the future was going to be stuck with less oil, and therefore they were going to be less well off, right? Because they weren't going to be able to ship stuff around, right? Makes some sense a little bit, sort of, kind of, marginally. All right, so taking it out of the ground sort of creates a cost for the future called a marginal user cost, right? And so there's a cost in the future of extracting oil. That's just a definition. It's an opportunity cost caused by scarcity over time. So marginal user costs are pretty prevalent in economics. Pretty much anything we do creates kind of an opportunity cost, especially if we're taking something and using it and not returning it. So unlike if you own a well, you create a marginal user cost. But if you own a factory that produces Porsches or something like that, you create a marginal user cost when you use the factory. You create a marginal user cost when you use the factory. Yeah.
A little bit like wear and tear on the machines.
Yeah. So there would be wear and tear on the machine, but you as a smart factory owner do what?
You sell it before it loses too much value.
You do what?
Like you sell it before it depreciates too much, and then you use
You
that.
might do that.
Yeah.
Or you might do what? You might also just invest a little bit every year to keep it up, right?
Yeah.
Spend some money to sort of fix the things that have gone wrong with the factory, right? To make sure that it operates well every year, right? So you can't do that with an oil well. Why not? Because you ran out, right? It's just depletion. Stuff is gone, right? You can't go stick more in there because it's gone. You have to take it from another well, which so it causes user cost of the other well, right? Whereas with most other capital assets, we can invest some money and keep them in pretty good shape for a long time, right? But there's gonna be some depreciation that happens, but it's not, kind of like the depreciation in a well, all right? Okay, so we can actually value this user cost. So just an example of valuing it. If you have the price of the oil and the cost of extracting it, the marginal user cost is exactly the cost of extracting the oil, right? So that price that we pay for oil, we pay for coal, we pay for natural gas, that carries a lot of information, right? It tells us about the sort of cost we're causing to the future. And it tells us about the value of that stuff today, all right? So just remember the definition of marginal user cost. Dynamic efficiency, I don't think you really have to remember this so much. Okay, so you can look at this slide and say, that's kind of a stupid slide, all right? But if you really want to know about dynamic efficiency, we'll chat about it. You can call me up on the phone or on a Zoom call, and I'll tell you all about it. How's that? Now, Hoteller's rule is an interesting one, right? Because this is kind of a concept of dynamic efficiency. It says that prices for all these non-renewable resources should rise at the rate of interest, but we've seen from all the pictures that none of them do, right? That the price of oil, it rose and fell. It didn't just keep rising, right? So Hoteller's rule is kind of an interesting rule because it's a rule a lot of economists refer to, but has never actually been shown to be true. So it's just a typical thing that economists tell you, right? On the one hand, it can be true, but mostly it's false. Isn't that what you come to know about economics? And sometimes it's useful, but mostly it's bullshit. Is that right? Okay. Good. Technology change, really, all these prices, are not driven by marginal user cost or health tellings rule or anything else, but driven by what? Technology change, right? So technology change has been a key driver of these prices for any of these sort of non-renewable resources. You see technology change just keeps getting better and better. So it's driven all these prices down. As economists, we always think these non-renewable resources, that their prices should be going up, but we keep coming up with these crazy technologies to make them cheaper. Just sucks. Okay, whatever. Okay, I saw all that. This conclusion, example, now we're done. Isn't that awesome? Was it amazing how quickly that ended? Right? Well, let's go back through a couple of things just to make sure that we all know exactly what we're supposed to know so that we can get the 2 questions from here that are gonna be on the exam. All right, how's that? And on the quiz. So just quickly, this stuff, don't worry about it. We don't really do discounting in here. There will be a little bit of discounting on the homework. And you might have a really simple problem on the exam that will look exactly like, I'm sorry, let's flip through these. Exactly like that problem, one of these problems, right? That's as hard as it would get, okay? I'm kind of hedging my bet. I think I took it off the exam last year because I decided it was kind of stupid. It's an important concept, discounting, but what's important is the concept, not so much that you could actually do the discounting for this class, right? For other classes, it's really important. So I'm not saying you should learn how to do it, because if you're taking a finance class, it's really important. And I actually highly recommend finance for everybody to take it. But what's really important is that as we get into the climate change stuff, we start to get understand the role of discounting for valuing resources over time, all right? And this concept of high discount rates mean you value the future less, and low discount rates mean you value the future more, all right? That's really important, all right? The mechanics of doing this are really important for you, especially if you're going to do finance. Less important for this class, right? Because we're not going to be doing a lot of finance with this class, other than the levelized cost of electricity. I recommend sort of some familiarity with these discounting formulas. Also, this is the compounding interest rate formula, so it's useful, right? So gain some familiarity with it and figure it out, but I don't think do that so much for the exam in this class, all right? Any questions on that part? I don't want to be unclear about that. I mean, I don't want to be up here encouraging you not to do some math. To do some math, all right. So that is that. Let's see, wait a minute, I gotta go back. I don't think there's anything else. Time value of money, that definition is important, right? Interest rate, discount rate, used interchangeably, that's important, at least for this class. The rate we're going to be worried about mostly is kind of the government rate, because we're worried mostly about climate change, right? This picture of these wells getting extracted is really important, because what I want you guys to think about is flipping this over and having the inverse of this, that we're essentially, we've got this non-renewable resource in the ground, and we've got a non-renewable resource in the atmosphere, right? The atmosphere is kind of, we're filling up with the carbon dioxide that we take out of the ground, right? So we've got exactly this problem in reverse with climate change. So absolutely the only reason I spend any time on this sort of extraction of this stuff from the ground is because it's exactly the inverse of the problem with the atmosphere, all right? So as soon as we start talking about climate change, you'll see this picture again. Okay, so this is important to remember. All right, and this marginal user cost, we just talked about the social cost of carbon or the damages from 1 ton of climate change. That's exactly what the marginal user cost is, essentially, right? Not just essentially. So one of the marginal user costs of extracting stuff from the ground is not just the value of the resource in a market, but it's also the damage the resource caused, right? The externality cost. So this marginal user cost also has to contain, the social cost and the damages caused by using that and burning it, okay? So marginal user cost is really important. All right, so again, just summarizing, it's important to sort of get this idea that, we're extracting this non-renewable resource from the ground and we're converting it into a non-renewable resource in the atmosphere, right? Yeah.
Marginal user costs, can you interchange that with social cost?
Well, no, marginal user cost should include social costs of carbon, right?
Okay.
So the true marginal user cost, the marginal user cost we talked about and defined right here was just the value of that barrel in a market, right? So the cost you impose on the future to not have a barrel of oil is exactly the value of the barrel today. But remember, there's an externality associated with that stuff, right? Which is that you also stuck the remains of that barrel into the atmosphere as CO2, right? And as in every sort of externality, that's left out of this price, right? So that's not included yet in the price. So we're gonna add that to the marginal user cost when we talk about climate change. So the true marginal user cost of a barrel of oil rightfully should include both the price and the social cost of carbon, right? So for now, the answer to your question is no. 3 weeks from now, yeah, we'll include social cost of carbon. Okay, so just keep this picture in mind, user cost in mind, dynamic efficiency, don't worry about it. Maybe just remember Hotelling's rule that the prices rise at the rate of interest. And then remember that nothing works out quite like that. Okay. In fact, the second piece of information that we'll make available to you as a benefit of attending today's class alone, and this is solely for those of you who happen to be here, is that this will be on the exam. How's that? And you guys will know it. You'll know the answer to it, right? Like the question would be, what is Hotelling's rule? And you'll like instantly know, right? Simply because you were here today. Now, anyone who is paying attention should be able to get that, even if they're not here, because they could go and look at the slide and get it. So I'm gonna add one extra thing to that. I'm gonna add it's garbage, maybe, right? Something like that, right? But it's wrong, right? Because it, because we did just you guys ever who do you think is the oldest? I know I'm the oldest person in the room. Who do you think's who's old in this room? Any of you old? Any of you ever have a really old car? No one had an old car?
No.
Like 70s version car? Yeah? Did you ever go in the car and use the radio? Oh, that's too bad. Anyone ever see an old radio?
You gotta twist the.
Yeah, twist the dial. Did you ever do that? Go, if you turn it really fast, I mean, seriously, go find an old radio, an FM radio, and do that. And it just goes as quickly as you can, turn the dial through the stations, and you'll hear that, because you go from one station to the next really quick. So that's kind of like me in class, right? I don't know what I'm talking about. All right, so. Yeah, Hotelling's rule. Do you see any evidence for Hotelling's rule in this picture? No, I mean, right? I mean, prices went up, they went down, so they went faster than interest rates then they went the other direction, right? So, yeah, I mean, we have this Hotelling's rule, and you may hear about it someday from someone else, and you'll just know it's not really accurate or true, right? Interesting, maybe, but mathematically, you can show why it should be true, but it doesn't exist because of all this technology change. So what would be good to remember from that as a bonus from this class is that, yeah, if we just did that, if we sort of assumed Hotelling, if I just said Hotelling's rule and it was prices rise at the rate of interest, everybody could get that, even if they weren't here, because they could look at the slide, right? So it'll have to be something related to the fact that it doesn't really work, right? Okay, so that's what the question will be about on the exam, so just pay attention to that. Okay, all right. So that's enough harassment for today. I won't harass you anymore. Enjoy Thursday afternoon. Oh, I did forget actually homework. Yeah, there's another homework, right? Sorry, there'll be another homework. I gotta get it posted up tonight. I just got it finished up with the TAs yesterday. I had to get them to go through it and make sure that it was correct. So I'll get it posted tonight. It'll be due next week. There is an exam coming up, right, the 10th of October. Not next week, the week after. I'll get the study guide up next week. We'll be able to talk about it probably on Thursday. Right?
Where's the sheet?
Oh, yeah, where's the sheet? Nice. How many extra credit points you want for that? Oh, 5% increase on your grade? No, it won't be that good. That'd be great though, wouldn't it? Maybe 1%, how's that? That's not bad. I think that'd be great.
I'll take what I can get.